Claude responded. My daughter-in-law's mother snapped her fingers at the caterer, and the caterer flinched harder than my own son did. My daughter-in-law's mother snapped her fingers at the caterer, and the caterer flinched harder than my own son did. That's what told me something was wrong before a single word was spoken. At the grand opening reception for my son's new restaurant, my wife grabbed my elbow so hard, I felt her nails through my sleeve. We need to leave, she whispered. Right now. I asked why. She wouldn't answer. Not in that packed dining room, not with 50 guests sipping champagne under string lights. She stayed silent all the way to the parking lot, silent as we climbed into the truck, silent until I turned the key. Then she turned to me, her face the color of old paper, and asked, Frank, did you ever actually read what you signed? What she told me next made my hands go numb on the wheel. My name is Frank Delacroix. I'm 63 years old, and for 38 years I ran Delacroix Millwork out of a converted barn in upstate New York, building custom cabinetry for people who wanted something better than particle board from a warehouse store. My wife, Anne, stood beside me through every lean winter and every good year after. Our son, Marcus, was the reason we kept going when the bank almost took the barn in 2009. We paid for his culinary degree. We paid for his wedding to a woman named Vanessa. And 2 months ago, I liquidated a chunk of my retirement and wired $850,000 to help him open his own place, a farm-to-table restaurant called the Amber Fork, right on the main strip of the town where he grew up. It was supposed to be his name on the deed and his name on the liquor license. That was the whole point. That was the dream. Tonight was the grand opening. The parking lot was full of cars nicer than anything Marcus had ever driven. Servers moved through the crowd with trays of things I couldn't pronounce. But something felt wrong the second Anne and I walked through the door. Marcus wasn't working the room. Instead, Vanessa's mother, a woman named Diane, was holding court near the wine bar like she'd built the place with her own 2 hands. Diane had never worked an honest day that I knew of, but she moved through that restaurant pointing at the reclaimed barnwood paneling and the pendant lighting like she was giving a tour of her own house. I told myself she was just a proud mother enjoying her daughter's good fortune. I grabbed a club soda and watched my son from across the room. He looked hollow. Every time I tried to catch his eye, Vanessa would appear out of nowhere and steer him toward another table of guests. That's when Anne's hand closed around my arm. My wife raised 4 kids on a schoolteacher's salary before we ever had 2 nickels to rub together. She does not scare easy. Seeing her that pale sent something cold straight down my spine. I followed her out the front door without a word. In the truck, once the doors were locked, she finally spoke. I went looking for the restroom upstairs, she said. The one by the private dining room. The door to the office was open. Diane was in there with 2 of her friends, showing them something on the wall. Anne swallowed hard. They were laughing, Frank. Laughing like they'd gotten away with something. My chest tightened. Laughing at what? I asked. Anne looked at me like she was about to hand me a knife I'd have to fall on. It was the business license, framed, hanging behind the desk. I gripped the wheel tighter. Marcus and Vanessa, I said, like saying it firm enough would make it true. No, Anne whispered. Marcus's name wasn't on it. Vanessa's wasn't either. It's registered to something called Birchwood Hospitality Group, LLC. I repeated the name slowly, my mind racing through everything I knew about corporate paperwork, which wasn't much. Birchwood, Anne said, was Diane's maiden name. The one she's always going on about, like her family used to own half the county. The air in that truck went thin. Diane's maiden name, on the license to the restaurant I had personally funded, 3 weeks after I wired the money. Are you certain? I asked, my voice dropping low. I saw the state seal, Frank. I saw the filing date. I sat there in the dark, feeling 38 years of 16-hour days curdle in my stomach. I didn't build a business out of a barn to hand my son's future to a woman who thought a folding chair was beneath her. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. It rang 3 times before it connected, but it wasn't my son's voice that answered. It was Diane, and she was laughing before she even said hello. Oh, Frank, she cooed. Marcus is much too busy moving my dining set into the private lounge to talk right now. Thank you so much for the lovely gift. The line went dead. Anne cried softly beside me the whole drive home. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table and pulled up the county clerk's website on my ancient laptop. It took me 11 minutes to find exactly what Anne had described. Birchwood Hospitality Group, LLC. Sole managing member, Diane Ashford. My son and daughter-in-law owned exactly nothing of the restaurant my $850,000 had built. I printed every page. I put them in a folder. And at 6 in the morning, I drove to the restaurant, walked past the delivery entrance, and let myself into the back office where Marcus kept the books. He looked up from his laptop, startled, coffee halfway to his mouth. "Dad? What are you doing here so early? We missed you at the toast last night." I didn't smile. I laid the printed deed on his desk without saying a word. I watched the blood leave his face. "Dad, listen. It's not what it looks like," he stammered. "There are things you don't understand about how we structured this." "I understand perfectly," I said. "I gave you money to open your restaurant, and you handed the ownership to your mother-in-law. She answered your phone last night to gloat about it. You have 1 minute to explain before I call my lawyer." Before he could speak, the door opened and Vanessa walked in carrying 2 coffees, her sweetness curdling the instant she saw the papers spread across the desk. "Did you seriously go digging through public records to spy on us?" she snapped, planting herself beside her husband like a wall. "This is our privacy, Frank. This is incredibly controlling." Marcus found his courage the moment his wife did. "We're adults, Dad. You can't storm in here throwing accusations because you don't understand modern business structuring." He pulled a thick folder from his desk drawer, gold letterhead on the front from some accounting firm I'd never heard of, and launched into an explanation about gift tax exposure, holding companies, 90-day transfer windows, protective vehicles for large capital injections. It was polished. It was confident. It was also complete nonsense, and I would have known that even if I hadn't spent 4 decades reading contracts by lamplight at my own kitchen table. You do not shelter a restaurant license inside your mother-in-law's LLC to dodge federal gift tax. That is not how any of this works. But I kept my face still and let him finish. Vanessa's eyes welled up right on cue. "How could you think so little of us? My mother has worked herself sick meeting with lawyers just to protect this family, and you're treating her like a criminal." Marcus wrapped his arm around her, looking at me with wounded, practiced disappointment. "Just give it 90 days, Dad. You'll see the ownership transfer. Just trust me." And there it was, the plea, the tears, the timeline dangled just out of reach. My gut told me the surface story was rotten clear through. If I fought them with logic and anger, they'd dig in and destroy whatever evidence remained. I needed them to believe they'd won, so I let my shoulders drop. I let my voice go thin and apologetic. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm just an old cabinet maker, son. All this legal language is over my head. When your mother saw that name on the wall, we panicked. I shouldn't have come in here yelling." The relief on their faces was instant and total. Marcus told me not to worry about it, that he understood, that we'd put it behind us. I turned to leave, moving like a tired old man, and as I pushed open the heavy glass door, the hallway lights turned the pane into a dark mirror. In that reflection, I watched Marcus dive back to his laptop the second my back was turned, dragging a folder into the trash with frantic clicks. The folder was open just long enough for me to read the name before it vanished. Delacroix, pension, transfer. The drive home was a blur. A tax dodge for a restaurant was greed, ugly, but ordinary. Touching a pension fund was something else entirely. I didn't have hundreds of retired mill workers depending on me the way a bigger company might, but I had 11 employees who'd built cabinets alongside me for 20 years, and every one of them had a retirement account I personally administered. If Marcus was moving that money, he wasn't stealing from me. He was stealing from Ray, who'd worked my lathe since 1994. From Carla, who ran my front office since before Marcus could tie his shoes. I needed to know how deep this went, and I needed to see it with my own eyes. I bought an expensive bottle of wine as an apology offering and drove to the restaurant 2 days later. Arriving quietly through the side door left ajar for deliveries. What I saw made my blood run cold. Marcus, a grown man who'd once negotiated a $200,000 build-out loan, was on his knees adjusting the legs of a dining table while Diane stood over him sipping wine like a queen inspecting a servant. 2 inches to the left, Marcus. I told you I wanted it centered under the chandelier. Are you incapable of following one simple instruction? Marcus mumbled an apology without lifting his eyes. She snapped her fingers at him twice, sharp, degrading, and he scrambled faster. I watched my son shrink into himself, a beaten-down errand boy in a restaurant that was supposed to carry his name on the sign out front. I stepped forward, my boots loud on the hardwood. Diane turned, saw the wine bottle in my hand, and her whole posture softened into false warmth. "Well, that's mature of you, Frank." I apologized for my behavior at the office, told her I only wanted peace in the family. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. When I casually asked him about the vendor contracts for the walk-in freezer, a normal business question, Vanessa stepped in front of him like a bodyguard. "He's not working today, Frank. We're focused on Mom's design vision. Your questions can wait." Marcus just nodded at the floor, agreeing to his own erasure. I excused myself to use the restroom and slipped instead into the office, the same one where Anne had seen the framed license. As I moved past the desk, my foot caught the edge of a small trash can, spilling its contents across the floor. I crouched to clean it up before anyone noticed and froze. Crumpled among the receipts were 3 collection notices from offshore sportsbooks in the Caribbean, addressed to Diane Ashford, demanding immediate payment on outstanding markers in numbers that made my stomach drop. Diane wasn't some proud matriarch protecting her daughter's future. She was drowning in gambling debt, and she was using my son's restaurant, my money, as a life raft. I put the papers back exactly as I'd found them, and drove home in a fog so thick I barely remember the roads. I told Anne everything at the kitchen table that night, the degrading way Diane treated our son, the deleted pension file, the torn-up gambling notices hidden in the trash. She covered her mouth with both hands. "We have to call the police, Frank," she whispered. "We have to stop him before he ruins everything." I shook my head. "If we go to the authorities now, he'll wipe the servers before anyone can subpoena them. He controls the books. He'll call me a confused old man, and Vanessa will back him up. We need proof they can't argue with, and I need to get it without him ever knowing I was looking." That night, once Anne was asleep, I sat down at my computer. I'm no expert with technology, but 20 years ago I'd hired the accountant who set up our original bookkeeping software, and I still remembered the master login he'd shown me once, back before Marcus took the books digital and locked me out of the day-to-day numbers, believing his father simply wouldn't understand modern systems. I typed in credentials I hadn't used in over a decade, half expecting nothing to happen. The screen flickered, then loaded. I was in. I bypassed the polished monthly summaries Marcus had been sending me and went straight into the raw ledger. For the first hour, everything looked ordinary: vendor payments, payroll, produce deliveries. Then I found it. A recurring $18,000 monthly wire, categorized under Consulting Services Brand Development, paid to an entity called Ashford Creative Partners. The billing address matched a modest apartment complex on the edge of town, the exact building where Diane had lived before Vanessa married my son. $18,000 a month, bleeding out of a restaurant that hadn't even turned a profit yet, straight into his mother-in-law's pocket to feed a gambling habit I now knew was real. I reached to download the records as proof. Before the file could finish, the screen flashed red. A security alert filled the monitor. "Unauthorized access detected, administrator notified." My stomach dropped. Marcus would know within minutes that someone had been inside his system. I shut the laptop immediately, scattered some old paperwork across my desk to make the office look like the disorganized workspace of a man who didn't know what he was doing, and went back to bed beside Anne, wide awake, waiting. At 6:15 the next morning, tires screeched into our driveway. Fists pounded on the front door. I threw on my robe, mussed my hair, and shuffled downstairs like a man roused from a deep sleep. Marcus stood on the porch, unshaven, his eyes wild. "Dad, the restaurant server got hit last night. Someone breached the system at 2 in the morning. It pinged back to this address." I let my shoulders sag. "Oh, son, I'm so sorry. I couldn't sleep, and I was trying to look at my old retirement statements on that new bookkeeping software you set up, and these red warnings kept popping up, and I got frustrated and just shut the whole computer off." I watched pure relief flood his face, followed almost instantly by that same old condescension. "Dad, you can't just go typing in old passwords on a modern system. You could have triggered a real breach alert. Leave the technical stuff to me, okay? If you want your statements, just ask my assistant to print them." He patted my shoulder like he was patting a confused old dog, and left. The second his car turned the corner, I called a man named Walter Higgins, a retired state auditor who now did forensic work quietly, for cash, for people who needed the truth and couldn't get it any other way. "Walter," I said, "I need you to find out exactly how deep my son has dug himself." That Friday, Anne invited the whole family for dinner, unaware that Walter was already 3 days into tearing apart Marcus's financial life. Marcus arrived relaxed, confident, believing he'd successfully convinced his foolish old father that nothing was wrong. Vanessa carried a bouquet like the picture of a devoted wife. And then came Diane, sweeping through our front door like she was inspecting a property she planned to buy. She complained about our thermostat before she'd even taken her coat off. At the table, Anne served her honest cooking, a pot roast, good bread, nothing fancy. Diane poked at it with her fork like she was examining roadkill. "How rustic," she said. "Reminds me of the simple meals my grandmother made during hard times. You really should hire someone, Anne." Anne's face reddened, but she said nothing. I smiled and nodded along, playing the fool, while under the table my burner phone buzzed against my thigh. The first text from Walter was blunt. "Birchwood Hospitality is a shell. No real operations. Pass-through entity only." I chewed slowly, nodding at something Marcus was saying about wine pairings. A second text. "Ashford Creative Partners ledger confirmed fraudulent. No employees, no deliverables. The $18,000 a month routes to an account in the Cayman Islands within 48 hours of each transfer." I glanced at Diane, dabbing her mouth with our good linen napkin, complaining our lighting made her look sallow. This woman critiquing my dining room was hollowing out my son's restaurant to feed a habit that had already cost her millions. A third text, longer, colder than the rest. "Frank, step outside. You need to hear this. It's worse than the restaurant." I excused myself, claiming the roast sat heavy, and slipped through the kitchen door into the cool evening. Walter was waiting in his sedan at the edge of our property, laptop glowing on the passenger seat. "Sit down, Frank," he said. "This is bad." He told me the offshore books had cut Diane off 6 months ago after she couldn't cover her losses. She'd turned to private lenders, the kind who don't send friendly reminder letters. She owed close to $1.5 million, with interest compounding weekly. $18,000 a month from the restaurant wasn't nearly enough to keep those lenders quiet. "So where's the rest coming from?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. Walter turned the laptop toward me. "Your company's retirement accounts, Frank. He's been moving money out of the pension plan you administer for your employees. Just over $600,000 so far, routed through Birchwood, straight to the same lenders. $600,000 belonging to Ray and Carla and 9 other people who trusted me with their futures. My son had stolen from the people who'd stood beside me for 20 years to bankroll his mother-in-law's addiction." "There's more," Walter said, and handed me a folder. Inside were documents bearing my forged signature declarations, naming me as personal guarantor on Diane's private debts, authorizations for transfers I'd never approved, every illegal dollar structured to trace back to me if it ever came to light. "He built himself an exit," Walter said quietly. "If this collapses, it collapses onto you. He looks like an innocent bystander following his confused father's instructions. My own son had engineered my ruin as his insurance policy." "How long until this surfaces on its own?" I asked. "Your accountant does the annual review in 3 weeks. She'll find the shortfall the moment she reconciles the pension ledger." Walter pulled one more document from his bag, sealed in plastic. "He knows that too, Frank. He's not waiting for the review to expose him." I intercepted an email exchange between Marcus, Vanessa, and a lawyer who specializes in one very specific kind of filing. He held it up. My hands went cold reading the title. A petition for emergency guardianship, citing my supposed cognitive decline, my erratic recent behavior, my inability to safely manage my own affairs or the business. They planned to file it within the week. Once a judge signed it, I would lose control of everything: the company, my finances, my own voice, and Marcus would be free to bury the pension theft under the excuse of his father's decline. They were going to bury me alive to save themselves. I didn't cry. I nodded at Walter, told him to secure every account I still controlled, and walked back through the grass toward the house, toward the family waiting at my table, already planning how to destroy me. The next morning I began the performance of my life. I called Marcus by my late brother's name over breakfast. I hid my keys in the refrigerator and let Vanessa find them, watching her barely suppress her glee as she texted something to Marcus. I stumbled over simple words on purpose. Every staged slip was a brick in the wall of their court filing, and every night, once the house was quiet, I met Walter and my attorney in the shadows to dismantle the noose Marcus had built around my neck. I moved my personal savings into an irrevocable trust beyond his reach. I had my lawyers place emergency holds on the forged guarantor documents before Diane's lenders could act on them. And in the deed to the restaurant building itself, which I still personally owned, having leased it to Marcus rather than sold it outright, I quietly recorded a lien securing every dollar I'd put into the business, transforming myself from a trusting father into the one creditor no court could ignore. By the end of the week, I had one thing left to do: catch him in the act. On record, with no room left for lies. I drafted a document on my letterhead titled Voluntary Transfer of Ownership Delacroix Millwork, full of convincing legal language surrendering my company entirely to Marcus. I left it on my desk with a pen beside it, signature line blank, and a tiny camera hidden inside an old cigar box on my bookshelf, its feed streaming to my phone. I told Marcus I was going to bed early, my mind foggy, and asked that no one disturb my office. Anne and I checked into a motel that night rather than sleep under our own roof with our son plotting downstairs. We sat on the edge of the bed watching the live feed on my laptop for over an hour, the office empty and still. Then, at 1:20 in the morning, the door creaked open. Marcus and Vanessa slipped inside like burglars, moving straight for the desk. Marcus snatched up the document, reading it fast, his face breaking into a slow, ugly smile. "Look at this," he whispered to Vanessa. "He's practically handing it to us." Vanessa grabbed the pages, laughing sharply. "I thought we'd have to fight him for months. He's completely gone, just a senile old man waiting to be milked." Anne wept silently against my shoulder as we listened to them plan our destruction like it was a business meeting. "We don't even need to forge it," Marcus said. "I'll bring it up at dinner Sunday. Tell him how tired he looks, how he should think about stepping back. He'll sign it himself to save face. Then we finalize the guardianship Monday. We lock him somewhere quiet upstate. He'll never talk to a lawyer again." I gripped Anne's hand and said nothing. "Let them have their Sunday dinner," I whispered. "It'll be their last." Sunday evening, the restaurant's private dining room was packed with Diane's wealthy friends, gathered to witness what she believed would be her final triumph. Marcus stood near the bar, clutching a leather folder to his chest, sweat on his brow despite the air conditioning. When Anne and I walked in, Vanessa rushed over, kissing Anne's cheek, while announcing loudly enough for nearby guests to hear how wonderful it was that I could still get out of the house these days, given how unpredictable Frank's been lately. I leaned on the cane I'd bought for exactly this purpose and let my hand tremble. At the table, Diane escalated. She ordered Anne to help pass appetizers to the guests, since the staff here is so incompetent, and you're so naturally suited to serving. The room went quiet, waiting to see if my wife would break. She simply picked up the tray and did it with more grace than Diane had shown in her entire life, while I gripped my chair and waited for the right moment. Then Diane pushed too far. She raised her wineglass toward Anne and announced she'd never seen a woman so comfortable playing the help, and that perhaps she'd hire her permanently once Frank is finally somewhere he can be properly looked after. I set down my fork. I stopped trembling. The room went dead silent as I looked her dead in the eye. "My wife," I said, my voice carrying without needing to rise, "built a real life with her own 2 hands while you built nothing but debt and borrowed jewelry. Do not speak to her again." Diane's face went through shock, then fury. Then she knocked her wineglass to the floor in a fit that shattered across the hardwood. Marcus lunged to his feet, playing his final card, hissing that I was embarrassing the family, that I was clearly having some kind of episode, that I needed to apologize immediately or he'd have no choice but to move forward with getting me help. He slammed the surrender document in front of me and pressed the pen into my hand, certain he'd finally broken me. I picked up that pen, and instead of signing, I snapped it in half in my fist, ink bleeding across the page. "You're fired," I said. "And you no longer run this restaurant." His face went blank with confusion. I turned toward the doorway and nodded. The door opened, and Walter walked in beside 2 federal agents whose badges caught the light. Marcus staggered backward into a chair. I stood and addressed the room, laying it all out in front of Diane's stunned friends, the shell company, the offshore lenders, the $600,000 stolen from the retirement accounts of people who'd spent decades earning it, the forged documents naming me as guarantor, and finally, the guardianship petition meant to silence me for good. Diane tried to bolt for the door and ran straight into the agents blocking it. Vanessa screamed at Marcus that he'd promised her his father was too stupid to ever find out, then slapped him across the face and announced she was filing for divorce before she'd even left the building. The agents cuffed Diane on federal wire fraud and money laundering charges while her wealthy friends stared in horrified silence, no one stepping forward to help her. Marcus dropped to his knees in front of me, begging, swearing he'd confess to everything if I'd just forgive him. I felt nothing. I told the room the restaurant building itself had never left my name, that the $850,000 had been structured as a company loan tied to his employment, and now that his employment was terminated for theft, that loan was in default. He had 24 hours to clear out. I walked past him without looking back, my hand on Anne's shoulder, and left him kneeling in the wreckage of everything he'd tried to steal. By Monday, it was in every local paper. Diane was denied bail. Vanessa filed for divorce within days and publicly distanced herself from the whole affair. I gathered my 11 employees in the shop that Thursday and told them the truth that my son had drained part of their retirement accounts and that I had already personally restored every dollar out of my own savings, with interest. Ray shook my hand so hard I thought he'd break it, Carla cried. I walked out of that barn having lost a son but having kept my word to the people who'd actually earned my loyalty. Anne and I sold the house that carried too many bad memories and moved into something smaller, simpler, with a porch and a garden, and nothing left to prove to anyone. Months passed. Then, on a bitter November night with sleet hammering the windows, our doorbell rang at midnight. I found Marcus on the porch, soaked through, shivering, his once-tailored clothes ruined, his eyes hollow. He begged to sleep in the garage, just for one night, swearing he'd be gone before sunrise, blaming Vanessa and Diane for everything, insisting they'd poisoned him against me. I stood in the doorway and looked at the stranger kneeling on my porch. I gave you everything I built with my hands, I told him, and you tried to lock me away so you could keep stealing. You're not my son anymore. You're just what's left over after the greed burned through everything else. I stepped back inside and shut the door, and turned the deadbolt, and didn't look back. I walked into the living room where Anne sat by the fire, and I took her hand, and for the first time in months, I felt nothing but peace. Love your children with everything you have, but never let that love turn you into someone's collateral. If you've ever had to close the door on family to protect your own peace, tell me about it below. I'd like to hear it. And if this story meant something to you, hit like and stay a while. We've got more true stories where this one came from. Claude responded, "Real love isn't measured by how much you hand over, but by how much respect comes back to meet it. Real love isn't measured by how much you hand over, but by how much respect comes back to meet it. Some of the sweetest peace comes not from holding on tighter, but from finally trusting your own worth enough to let go of what hurts you. Keep giving generously to those who earn it, your family, your friends, your true home, and you'll find your heart lighter than you thought possible." A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI purely for entertainment, though I hope its gentle life lesson still found a warm place in your heart.